The words rang out like shattering glass. "Who do you think you are, touching him?" The ballroom had fallen into stunned silence, broken only by the hissed accusation from the head butler, his face pale with fury. Naomi's hand, still extended with the small wrapped candy, trembled faintly before she lowered it. All around her, guests froze mid-sip, their jeweled gowns and tuxedos glittering under chandeliers, eyes wide in scandal. The forbidden image was burned into every gaze, a black maid, in her plain gray dress and apron, daring to approach Damien Whitmore, the untouchable millionaire. But Damien himself did not move. He stood like a statue near the grand piano, tall and broad-shouldered, his tailored black suit sharp against the white marble floor. His icy blue eyes fixed on the candy in Naomi's hand. His fingers twitched at his side, tapping a rhythm no one could hear. And then, he spoke. "Thank you." 2 words. Rough, gravelly, low, as though dragged up from a cave long sealed. The shock of it was greater than if thunder had rolled through the ballroom. Gasps rippled. Champagne glasses clinked against plates as hands trembled. For years, no one had heard Damien Whitmore's voice. Not a single word at any gala, not in interviews, not in gatherings of power. Silence had become his legend. And now, he had spoken. To her. Naomi felt her breath catch, her lips parting slightly. His eyes, those piercing, wounded eyes, were on her, not on the glittering crowd. Slowly, he took the candy from her hand. The soft brush of his fingers against hers made her skin prickle with heat. He unwrapped it, placed it on his tongue, and for the first time in years, his mouth curved into something almost human, a smile. It was in that moment, before the murmurs rose into uproar, that Naomi understood. Nothing in her life would ever be the same. Hours earlier, before the storm, the evening had, begun like countless others. The Whitmore estate glowed under the winter night, its windows ablaze, its sweeping staircase garlanded with silver ribbons. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, attendants rushing to open doors as the city's elite arrived in glittering waves. Inside, the ballroom gleamed with chandeliers and polished marble, a symphony of clinking glasses and murmured vanity. At the top of the room, isolated as always, stood Damien Whitmore. 32, with the air of an emperor in exile, he commanded attention without a word. His face, sharp jawline, straight nose, the faintest shadow of stubble, belonged to magazine covers, yet no smile graced it. His eyes were like shards of sky-colored glass, cool and unyielding. Guests approached only to falter beneath his silence, retreating embarrassed. It was his ritual, his game, his fortress. Naomi Clark moved among them unnoticed, a shadow with a tray in her hands. 24, her frame slender but strong from endless work. Her uniform was plain, her shoes worn, yet she walked with a quiet grace that made her seem almost out of place among servants. Her skin glowed warm brown beneath the lights, her natural curls bound neatly back beneath a scarf. What most missed, or refused to see, was the life in her eyes, deep, luminous, brimming with curiosity. She had been working at the estate for a year now. She had seen the laughter, the cruelty, the games these people played with each other, and she had seen Damien most of all. Alone, silent, his hands restless, his eyes heavy. Something about him struck her. Not his wealth, not his looks, but the sadness stitched into his stillness. "Clark," snapped the head butler, a thin man with a severe jaw. "The trays. Faster. Do not linger." "Yes, sir." Her voice was soft, obedient, but her mind hummed elsewhere. As the night deepened, the cruel whispers began, as they always did. Guests gathered in groups, daring each other. "Go on, try to speak to him. He won't answer you. Perhaps he can't. No, he thinks he's too good." Laughter bubbled, sharper than the champagne. Each failed attempt was met with ridicule. A young banker returned red-faced, muttering, "He just looked at me like I was dirt." Applause and mockery followed. Naomi's stomach tightened. She hated it. The way people needed someone to humiliate to feel grand. She carried her tray through them, unseen, her eyes flicking to Damien by the piano. His jaw was tight, his knuckles white against his glass, and his fingers, always tapping, always restless, like someone trying to drum out a voice trapped inside. She slipped into the service corridor, set down her tray, and reached into her apron pocket. There it was, her little stash of peppermints, wrapped in crinkling cellophane. A small comfort she kept for long nights. She unwrapped one, popped it into her mouth, let the sweetness soften the bitterness in her chest. And then, something tugged at her. A thought, reckless and impossible. She found herself walking back into the ballroom, her hand clutching another wrapped candy. Her pulse thudded, but her steps carried her across the polished floor, past stunned faces, until she stood before Damien Whitmore himself. His eyes met hers. A flicker of surprise crossed them. Not disdain, not coldness, but something softer. She held out the candy. Her voice trembled, but did not break. "Here. Sometimes sweetness helps." The room inhaled as one. The butler hissed. Guests stared in disbelief, some with open scorn. But Damien took the candy, and Damien spoke. The uproar erupted only after. The whispers spread like fire. "Did you see? A maid? Unthinkable! Disgraceful!" Naomi felt the heat of humiliation on her cheeks, but she did not lower her gaze. Damien still watched her, and that strange, fragile smile lingered. For the first time, she thought she saw him not as a man of stone, but as a man broken and yearning. And yet, in that moment, she also knew the danger. For daring to cross that invisible line, she had painted a target on her back. The night had only begun. The echo of Damien's voice still pulsed through the ballroom long after he had retreated into silence again. "Thank you." 2 words that had undone years of icy mystery. 2 words that now clung to Naomi's skin like heat, refusing to fade. But where some had gasped in wonder, others responded with cruelty. By the time the orchestra struck up again and laughter began to return in forced waves, the whispers had sharpened into blades. She touched him. Bold? No, shameless. A maid thinking she can tame him with candy. What a joke. Naomi carried her tray back toward the kitchens, her shoulders squared, her chin high. She had learned long ago that lowering her eyes gave people permission to trample her dignity. Still, the sting was real. She could feel the eyes on her back, the weight of their sneers. Behind the double doors of the service hall, the noise muffled into a dull roar. She leaned against the wall, breath catching in her chest. Her fingers toyed with the empty wrapper in her pocket. She hadn't planned any of it. It had been impulse, kindness, instinct. Yet already it was being twisted into scandal. The head butler appeared, tall and severe, his jaw rigid as stone. His voice was low but cutting. "You will never, under any circumstance, address Mr. Whitmore again. Do you understand?" Naomi lifted her chin. You only overstepped." His glare burned. "You forget your place, Clark. This household does not tolerate impropriety." Impropriety. As if her simple gesture of kindness had been indecent. As if offering a piece of candy to a lonely man was an act of seduction. Her stomach turned, but she swallowed the words she wanted to unleash. She needed this job. The paycheck that kept her mother's medication refilled, the rent barely covered. "Yes, sir," she murmured. Back in the ballroom, Damien remained by the piano, silent once more. But inside, his chest was tight with a sensation he had nearly forgotten. Relief. That single piece of candy melting on his tongue had been more than sugar. It had been a thread pulling him back toward life. For 6 years, his words had been locked away, buried beneath the wreckage of grief. He had told himself he had nothing left to say, that silence was safer than the risk of breaking. But the maid, the young woman with luminous eyes, had pierced that shell with absurd simplicity. She hadn't asked anything of him. She hadn't tried to force him into conversation. She had simply offered sweetness. And he had spoken. To her. Now, the room swirled with speculation. He could feel it like gnats buzzing around his head. They whispered about her, about him, about what it meant. He clenched his jaw and tried to drown it out, but the guilt returned, the old familiar weight. He had exposed her. She would pay for his weakness. The days that followed were worse for Naomi. She noticed the changes at once, the snickers when she passed by, the way some of the other staff avoided her, afraid to be tainted by association, The guests at smaller gatherings watched her too closely, some with fascination, others with open contempt. One evening, while clearing glasses, a woman draped in diamonds leaned toward her with a smile too sharp to be kind. "So you're the one who got him to speak. Clever girl." Her voice dripped with mockery. "I suppose every man has his tastes." Heat rose in Naomi's cheeks. She set down the tray carefully, refusing to give the woman the satisfaction of a flinch. "I was only being kind, ma'am." The woman laughed. "Kindness? My dear, don't dress it up. You saw an opportunity, a maid who thinks she can climb." Others chuckled. Naomi excused herself before her composure cracked, but inside her chest ached with humiliation. It was during one of these nights that Damien ought her out. She was polishing glasses alone in the service hall when his reflection appeared in the mirror above the counter. She turned, startled, nearly dropping the glass. He stood there in his black suit, hands in his pockets, eyes heavy but intent. "Naomi." Her name sounded strange in his voice, rough and unused, but it struck something deep within her. She swallowed. "Mr. Whitmore, you shouldn't—" "I wanted to thank you," he said, his words halting, as if unused muscles were struggling to remember how to move. "For that night." Naomi's throat tightened. She nodded. "You're welcome." Silence stretched between them. His gaze held hers, searching, almost desperate. Then he said softly, "You gave me back something I thought I'd lost." The vulnerability in his tone shook her. For a moment she forgot the walls between them, wealth, status, color, everything. It was just two people, one broken, one offering light. But reality snapped back quickly. She stepped aside, forcing her voice steady. "You should be careful. People are watching. They already think—" She trailed off, unable to say the words. His jaw clenched. "Let them think." But she shook her head. "Easy for you. You're a Whitmore. They'll never forgive me." Her words hung between them, heavy and true. The pressure built steadily. By the next gala, Naomi felt the tension the moment she stepped into the ballroom with her tray. The air crackled with anticipation. Guests eyed her as though waiting for another scandal, another display. Some smirked. Some whispered openly. She kept her head high, but dread pooled in her stomach. Tonight, she feared, something would break. And it did. While serving champagne near the orchestra, she was cornered by a group of men in tailored suits. Their laughter was already loud, their drinks too many. One leaned close, his breath sour. "So, candy girl, what's your secret? Wisp. Are sweet nothings into his ear when you dust his shelves?" The others cackled. Naomi stiffened, clutching her tray. "Excuse me, sir." But he stepped in her path, smirking. "Or maybe you're sweeter than you look. Tell us, what does a maid give a millionaire that the rest of us can't?" The laughter rose, cruel and cutting. Naomi's chest burned, her hands trembling against the tray. She wanted to scream, to hurl the glasses into their faces, but she forced her voice low and steady. "Dignity, something you wouldn't understand." Gasps and jeers followed. Someone muttered, "Watch your tongue, girl." The head butler appeared, face thunderous. He seized Naomi's arm, dragging her aside. "Enough. You're dismissed for the evening." Her throat ached as humiliation crashed over her. In the corner of her vision she saw Damien, standing, frozen, watching. His fists were clenched, but he did not move. He said nothing. And in that silence, Naomi's heart broke. Naomi lay awake that night, staring at the cracked ceiling of her tiny apartment. The city hummed faintly outside her window, distant cars, sirens far away, but none of it drowned out the echo in her mind. The laughter, the taunts, the silence. His silence. Damien had stood there, watching her humiliation unfold. She had felt his eyes on her, had seen the tension in his jaw, the fury in his clenched fists. But when it mattered, when she was cornered, mocked, dragged away, he had said nothing. And silence, she thought bitterly, could wound deeper than cruelty. Her mother's soft cough carried from the bedroom. Naomi sat up, pressing her palms against her eyes until stars sparked. She couldn't afford to lose this job, not when the paycheck bought pills, not when rent loomed like a storm cloud, but pride twisted inside her, pride and the sting of betrayal. At the estate the next morning, the air was sharp with disapproval. The head butler's glare followed her through the halls. Some of the maids kept their distance, afraid to be caught in her shadow. Others whispered. She should have known better. He'll tire of her. She'll be gone soon. Naomi forced herself to work harder, faster. She scrubbed floors until her knuckles reddened, polished silver until her reflection blurred, but no amount of diligence erased the whispers. When she passed through the library that evening to dust the shelves, she found Damien there, standing by the fire with a glass in hand. His eyes lifted the moment she entered. Naomi. Her chest tightened. She wanted to ignore him, to walk past as though he were another piece of furniture, but his voice, raw, halting, stopped her. I'm sorry. The words froze her in place. She turned, dustcloth clenched in her fist. His face was taut, shadows beneath his eyes. He looked smaller somehow, not the untouchable millionaire, but a man weighed down. You watched them humiliate me, she said, her voice quiet but edged with steel. You could have stopped it. One word from you would have silenced them, but you let it happen. His gaze dropped to the fire. I couldn't. Her breath caught. Couldn't? Or wouldn't? He flinched, as if struck. Then, after a long pause, he spoke again, voice low. I'm not who they think I am. My silence, it isn't arrogance. It's punishment. Naomi frowned, confused, but before she could press him, he shook his head. You don't owe me anything, least of all forgiveness. She studied him, torn between anger and pity. He was trying in his broken way to explain. But the wound in her chest was too fresh. She turned back to her work, her voice steady. Then don't ask for it. Days blurred into weeks. Their strange connection, so briefly sparked, faltered under the weight of distance. Naomi withdrew into herself, speaking only when duty required. She poured her energy into work, into her mother's care, into anything that would keep her from remembering the look in Damien's eyes. But Damien couldn't forget. Each night, as the estate emptied of guests and music, he found himself replaying the sound of her voice. The strength in her defiance, the fire in her eyes when she told those men off. She had given him back his voice, and then his cowardice had stolen it again. His silence, once armor, now felt like chains. The cruelty of the wealthy did not stop. At the next gathering, a smaller dinner with half a dozen guests, Naomi carried plates into the dining room. She kept her eyes down, moving silently between polished chairs. One of the men, smirking, leaned back in his seat. Ah, there she is, the candy girl. Laughter rose around the table. Damien stiffened at the head, his hand tightening around his glass. Naomi placed a dish carefully before a guest, her face expressionless. The man continued. Tell me, darling, do you carry sweets for all the men you serve? Or just the rich ones? Naomi's heart pounded, but she forced her voice calm. I carry them for myself, to get through nights like this. A sharp gasp followed. The woman beside him laughed, delighted. She has a tongue after all. The man's smile faltered, annoyance flickering across his face. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a $20 bill, and flicked it onto her tray. There. For more candy. Consider it a tip. The note lay there like an insult. Naomi's fingers curled around the tray, but she did not touch the money. She met his eyes, her voice steady but firm. I don't take payment for kindness. The table went silent. For a moment, even the air seemed to pause. Then the laughter came, louder, crueler. Oh, she thinks she's noble. A maid with pride. How quaint. Naomi turned, leaving the bill untouched, her back straight though her chest burned. Damien's knuckles whitened on the glass. His throat worked, words pressing, but still he said nothing. Not yet. Later that night, Naomi retreated to the servants' quarters, her hands trembling as she folded linens. She hated herself for letting them get to her, hated the way her chest ached with shame, but she refused to break in front of them. A knock came at the door. She opened it to find Damien standing there, unannounced, out of place in the narrow hallway. His suit jacket was gone, his tie loosened, his eyes were raw. Why are you here? She whispered, glancing down the hall. Because I can't. His voice cracked. He swallowed, trying again. I can't keep watching them tear you apart. And I can't keep hiding. Naomi froze. The words trembled with desperation, with something close to pain. For a heartbeat she saw him not as the untouchable millionaire, but as a man drowning, reaching for her as though she were the only thing keeping him afloat. But fear twisted inside her. She shook her head. Then don't hide. Speak. Not just to me, to them. His jaw tightened. I will. But Naomi's voice was cool, skeptical. We'll see. She closed the door softly, leaving him in the dim hall, his promise hanging like a fragile thread. The next gala would test that thread. The ballroom glittered brighter than ever, chandeliers blazing, guests flowed in, voices rising, eager for spectacle. Rumors had spread, sharper than knives. Everyone was watching Damien, everyone was watching Naomi. She moved through the room with her tray, face calm, though her pulse thudded. The cruelty struck quickly. A woman in emerald silk whispered loud enough to carry, "Careful, she might offer you candy, and then he'll kneel." Laughter erupted. Naomi's cheeks burned, but she kept walking. At the head of the room, Damien rose. For the first time in years, he looked out over the sea of faces with something more than emptiness. His chest tightened, his throat burned, his fists clenched at his sides. Tonight, he promised himself, the silence would end. "Say it, Candy Girl." The words rang across the ballroom like a whip crack, sharp on. Ought to cut through the music. Naomi froze mid-step, the tray trembling slightly in her hands. Dozens of eyes turned, hungry for spectacle. The man in the navy suit, the same who had mocked her weeks before, was grinning like a wolf. "Tell us," he jeered, holding up his champagne. "What sweetness did you whisper to our silent king to make him bow to a maid?" The crowd erupted in cruel laughter. Some clapped, others whistled. The orchestra faltered, notes breaking off awkwardly. Naomi's stomach twisted. Heat rose in her cheeks, but she forced herself to stand tall, tray balanced against her palm. "I whispered nothing," she said evenly, though her voice shook. "I offered kindness." Gasps, mockery. Someone shouted, "Kindness doesn't buy mansions." Another laughed, "She's rehearsed. Look at her playing philosopher." Naomi's chest ached. Her throat burned with unshed tears, but she would not let them see her break. She turned, intending to walk away, but the man stepped in front of her, blocking her path. His smirk widened. "Then show us, sweetheart. Offer me one too." The crowd howled with laughter, delighting in the cruelty. Naomi's fingers tightened on the tray, her pulse racing. She wanted to slap him, to scream, to shatter every glass in his hand. But she stood frozen, every avenue of escape closed by walls of silken gowns and tailored suits. And then the room shifted. A chair scraped. Footsteps echoed against marble. The crowd fell suddenly quiet as Damien Whitmore rose from his seat. Tall, imposing in his black suit, he cut through the air like a blade. His icy blue eyes locked on the man, his jaw rigid. For years he had been silent, their untouchable enigma. But tonight, his chest heaved with something raw, volcanic, impossible to contain. He stepped forward, the crowd parting like water. And then, with a voice rough but strong, he spoke. "Enough!" The word thundered. It seemed to vibrate in the crystal chandeliers, in the marble underfoot. Gasps. Rippled, glasses trembled in hands. Damien had spoken again, and this time, not in secret, not in whispers, but to all of them. The man laughed nervously. "Ah, so the statue does move. Only for his maid." Damien's eyes narrowed. "She is not your joke." His voice deepened, each word deliberate, unflinching. "She is not your entertainment. She is the only person in this room who has shown me humanity." Shock fell across the room like frost. Silence stretched. Naomi's lips parted in disbelief, her pulse roaring in her ears. Damien's chest rose and fell, his voice breaking slightly as he continued. "For years, I have been silent. Not because I thought myself above you, not because I had nothing to say, but because I lost the right to speak." His gaze swept the room, then dropped briefly to the floor. 6 years ago, the woman I loved died. She died chasing after me, in anger because of me. And since that night I have carried the weight of her voice, silenced by my failure. I thought words had no meaning. That silence was my punishment. The crowd was utterly still. No laughter now, no sneers. Only the echo of confession. "And then," Damien said, turning toward Naomi, his voice cracking, "a maid offered me a piece of candy." His throat tightened, but he forced the words. She gave me sweetness when I had drowned in bitterness. She gave me courage when I thought I had none left. She gave me back my voice. Tears burned Naomi's eyes. Her hands trembled against the tray. The man in the navy suit sneered, trying to break the tension. So this is it? A sob story? You'll embarrass yourself for her? Damien turned on him, his voice rising with unrestrained fury. Embarrass myself? No. For once, I will honor myself by honoring her. And then, to the shock of every glittering guest in the ballroom, Damien Whitmore sank to one knee before Naomi Clark. The world seemed to stop. Crystal chandeliers blurred. Champagne froze mid-glass. Naomi stared down at him, her breath stolen, her heart pounding against her ribs. His head bowed slightly, his voice hoarse with desperation. I am sorry, he said, loud enough for all to hear, for my silence when they mocked you, for letting them humiliate you while I hid in my grief. I beg your forgiveness, Naomi, not as your employer, not as a Whitmore, but as a man who owes you his life. Gasps erupted. Some guests covered their mouths. Others exchanged wide-eyed looks. No one dared laugh now. The sight of the untouchable millionaire kneeling before a maid silenced even the cruelest tongues. Naomi's chest tightened, her eyes burning. Her hand trembled as she lowered the tray to the floor. This moment, this impossible, unthinkable moment, was heavy with truth. But she also felt the weight of every cruel whisper, every humiliation, every scar carved by silence. Slowly, she knelt too, meeting his eyes. I forgive you, she whispered, her voice breaking. Then louder, so the room could hear. But forgiveness isn't enough. If your words mean anything, prove it. Not just tonight. Every day. Damien's lips trembled into the faintest smile, raw and vulnerable. I will. The crowd erupted, not in laughter, but in stunned applause, hesitant at first, then swelling. Some clapped out of awe, others out of fear of being left behind. But the sound filled the air nonetheless. Naomi, trembling, felt a rush of something fierce, something liberating. For the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. For the first time, she wasn't beneath them. She stood equal because she had demanded it. And Damien, still on his knees, knew the turning point had come. His silence was broken forever. The applause rolled unevenly across the ballroom, like thunder that didn't quite know whether to echo or fade. Some clapped with trembling hands, caught in the force of the moment. Others clapped stiffly, afraid of standing out if they did not. Still others stood frozen, their eyes wide with disbelief. Naomi felt all of it, the heat of the lights overhead, the ripple of breathless stares, the floor firm beneath her knees. And Damien, still kneeling before her, his face tilted up, his eyes raw and unflinching. Slowly, she stood. The tray at her feet glimmered with abandoned glasses. She extended her hand, not in submission, not in secrecy, but openly, in front of them all. Damien rose with her, his hand warm, steady, trembling with the weight of the vow he had just spoken. For the first time that evening, Naomi allowed herself a smile, small, quiet, but real. The orchestra, unsure of what else to do, began to play again. Music floated thinly back into the air, though it could not erase the shock stamped across every guest's face. The whispers began almost immediately. A performance. He's lost his mind. She's clever, that one. Clever enough to snare him. No, he loves her. Didn't you see his eyes? The words wove through the ballroom like smoke. Naomi felt them but refused to let them settle into her skin. She lifted her tray once more and walked through the crowd with measured grace, though her heart was still hammering from the storm. Damien stayed near her, not clinging, but never letting the distance grow too far. His presence was protective now, not silent. He met the eyes of those who stared too long, and for the first time, people looked away. Still, not all reactions softened. Near the bar, Naomi caught sight of the man in the navy suit, the instigator, the cruelest voice. His smirk had hardened into something colder. He whispered to another guest, his hand slicing the air in disdain. Their laughter was quieter now, edged with something darker, envy. Naomi's stomach knotted, but she pressed on. Later, as the night wound down and the guests trickled out into their cars, the air in the estate shifted. The grandeur the ballroom gave way to quiet, to exhaustion. Naomi slipped into the kitchen, setting her tray down on the counter. Her hands trembled faintly as the adrenaline began to fade. She barely had time to breathe before the head butler entered. His face was pale, lips pinched tight. "You've disgraced this household," he said sharply, "parading yourself in front of guests, letting Mr. Whitmore make a spectacle." Naomi straightened, meeting his glare. For once, she didn't shrink back. "I didn't make a spectacle. He chose to speak. He chose to kneel. That was his decision." "You provoked it," the butler hissed. "Do you think this ends well for you? You'll be cast out, blacklisted. No one will hire you again." Her hands curled into fists. "Then I'd rather be cast out than crawl under your silence." The butler's eyes widened at her defiance. Before he could retort, another voice filled the doorway. "She will not be cast out." Both turned. Damien stood there, tall, composed, his voice steady. "She stays, not as a maid, as a guest. From this night forward." The butler's face drained of color. He bowed stiffly and left without another word. Naomi's breath caught. "Damien?" He stepped closer, his expression softening. "You shouldn't have had to fight them alone. Not anymore." For a moment the quiet between them felt sacred, like a promise carved into air. But outside the estate, the story spread like wildfire. By morning, newspapers were printing headlines. "Reclusive Whitmore breaks silence for his maid." "Millionaire kneels before servant. Love or scandal?" "Candy girl captures Whitmore's heart." Photos of the moment, the tray at her feet, Damien kneeling, Naomi's stunned face, circulated with a speed that made Naomi dizzy. She couldn't step outside her apartment without noticing strangers whispering. Some smiled at her with admiration. Others sneered. At the estate, the other staff walked with cautious distance. Some gave her small nods of support, others avoided her altogether. Naomi bore it all with the same quiet dignity she always had, but inside, the pressure swelled. Damien, meanwhile, faced the brunt of the elite's backlash. Business partners called in disbelief. Board members questioned his judgment. Some demanded he retract his words, dismiss the girl, restore his reputation. He refused. "My reputation is nothing if it costs me my humanity," he told them flatly. But cracks formed around him. Old allies turned cold. Investors wavered. Naomi saw it in the tightness of his jaw, in the weariness lining his eyes. "You're paying a price," she told him one night as they stood on the balcony, the city lights glittering below. He glanced at her, his expression soft but resolute. "If the price of truth is isolation, then I'll pay it. I've lived in silence long enough." Her heart ached at his words. She believed him, but she also feared for him. For both of them. The next gala loomed, the largest of the season, the Whitmore Foundation's annual charity event. Invitations had already been sent, the city abuzz with anticipation. Everyone wanted to see if the spectacle would continue, if the millionaire and the maid would stand together. Naomi dreaded it, yet she also knew it could not be avoided. Damien was determined. "We'll face them," he told her, "together." The night arrived. The ballroom was brighter, louder, more crowded than ever. Cameras flashed at the doors, reporters jostled for position. Inside, the air vibrated with tension, every guest hungry for drama. Naomi entered at Damien's side, not behind him, not as a servant, but walking beside him in a simple navy dress he had insisted she wear. She had protested at first, uncomfortable with the gift, but he had pressed gently. "It isn't about the dress. It's about them seeing you as I do." Her heart had stuttered at that, and now, under the blazing lights, she carried herself with quiet pride. Whispers erupted instantly. "He brought her. Look, on his arm." "It's true then." Naomi felt the weight of their stares, but Damien's hand at her back was steady, grounding. She lifted her chin, refusing to falter. Yet in the crowd, she saw the man in the navy suit again. His eyes burned with something sharper than mockery now, something vengeful. He leaned close to another guest, whispering, and they both laughed. Naomi's pulse quickened. She knew cruelty wasn't finished with her. Not yet. The night was far from over. The gala had the quality of a storm about to break. Laughter rang too loud, glasses clinked too sharply, and the air was thick with the perfume of both roses and suspicion. Naomi felt it the moment she walked in, the way the room tilted, the way every gaze seemed to cut. Damien's hand rested gently at her lower back, but even his touch couldn't steady her entirely. The orchestra began to play, but the music seemed more like a distraction than a centerpiece. Reporters had slipped inside under the guise of donors. Their cameras flashed from the corners, hungry for evidence of scandal. Every step Naomi took echoed louder than it should have, as if the floorboards themselves were listening. She was halfway across the ballroom when a voice cut through the hum. "So it's true," the man in the navy suit drawled, his words laced with venom. He raised his glass mockingly. "The mighty Whitmore has fallen, on his knees for the help." Gasps rippled, heads turned. Naomi froze. Damien, however, pivoted slowly, his eyes narrowing but his face calm. "Careful," Damien said evenly. "Your words reveal more about you than they ever will about her." The man smirked. "Oh, I'm simply saying what everyone else is thinking." She saw a rich man lonely in his silence and, he gestured crudely, offered him candy. How quaint. A hush fell, sharp and dangerous. Naomi's breath caught in her throat. Damien's voice, when it came, was quiet, but thunderous in tone. Its clarity. "She offered me kindness when all of you offered me silence. That is more than any of you have ever dared." The words sliced through the room. People shifted, uncomfortable, but the man in navy only pressed harder. "You'll regret this," he sneered. "Your fortune, your reputation, your empire, it will crumble, and she will leave you when it does." Naomi felt something in her break, not in despair, but in resolve. She stepped forward before Damien could answer, her voice carrying clear and steady across the ballroom. "I will not leave him," she said. "Not when he's mocked, not when he's broken, not when the world turns against him, because I saw him long before the rest of you did." The room stilled. Naomi's chest rose and fell, her hands trembling, but her gaze did not falter. Damien turned toward her, and in his eyes was something she had not seen before, something unguarded, almost shattered by the depth of her words. The man in navy laughed, brittle and sharp. "A maid preaching to millionaires. What a comedy this has become." But the laughter didn't catch. The crowd was no longer entirely on his side. Murmurs began to swell, some in agreement, but others in defense. Guests shifted uncomfortably, as if realizing they were standing on the wrong side of history. Then, in a moment that no one expected, an elderly woman with silver hair and a diamond necklace stepped forward. Her voice was frail but unwavering. "Enough," she said. "You mock kindness as weakness, but kindness is the only thing worth kneeling for. I saw what happened last week. I saw his face when she offered him candy. It was the first time he looked alive in years." Her words rang out, carrying far more weight than the man's cruelty. A ripple of agreement spread. Others nodded. A few clapped, hesitant, but real. The man in navy paled. His smirk faltered. He tried to laugh it off, but the sound was hollow now. He had lost his hold. Damien's hand closed around Naomi's, firm and sure. "You've humiliated yourself tonight," Damien told the man. "But perhaps humiliation is the only teacher you'll ever listen to." The man's jaw clenched. He stormed toward the exit, his glass shattering on the floor behind him. The room exhaled, the tension loosening, though the echoes of the moment lingered like thunder after lightning. Naomi's knees felt weak, but Damien steadied her. "You were extraordinary," he whispered, low enough only for her to hear. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, but she blinked them back. "I just spoke the truth." "And that," he said softly, "is what terrifies them." The rest of the evening unfolded differently. Conversations shifted, less sharp, more cautious. Some guests approached Damien and Naomi directly, offering congratulations or apologies. Not all were sincere, but enough were that Naomi felt the balance beginning to tilt. For the first time, she was not invisible. But visibility was not without its cost. When the night ended, Damien escorted her to the balcony once more. The city sprawled beneath them, lights like scattered jewels. Naomi leaned on the railing, the cool night air washing over her. "I don't know if I can live in this light," she admitted quietly. "Every look, every whisper, it feels like 1,000 weights pressing down." Damien turned to her, his face softened by moonlight. "You don't have to live in it alone." I will carry what you cannot. Her heart ached at his words, but fear lingered. They'll never stop, she said. They'll always see me as less. Then let them, Damien answered. Because I see you as more, and I always will. His hand found hers again, their fingers intertwining. Naomi closed her eyes, letting the warmth of his touch anchor her. For a moment, the world outside the balcony ceased to exist. It was just the two of them, broken, defiant, and unashamed. But the world had not finished with them. The next morning, the papers told the story differently. Some praised Naomi as a woman of courage. Others vilified her as a schemer, a gold digger who had bewitched the lonely heir. Photos of her standing tall in the ballroom spread across tabloids, twisted with lies. In the Whitmore offices, board members raged. Some threatened to resign. Investors pulled out of projects. Damien's empire wavered on the brink. By noon, his phone buzzed non-stop with calls, each one more venomous than the last. Naomi watched him from across the study, his face drawn, his eyes shadowed. She wanted to reach for him, to pull the phone from his hand, to shield him from it all, but she knew he wouldn't allow himself to be shielded. When he finally set the phone down, his voice was ragged. "They're coming for everything." Naomi crossed the room, her steps soft but determined. She cupped his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "Then let them take it. Let them strip it all away. Because what's left, what's real, isn't theirs to touch." Damien's eyes glistened. He closed them, leaning into her palms as though her touch was the only thing keeping him upright. "I don't deserve you," he whispered. "Yes," she said firmly. "You do." And for the first time in years, Damien Whitmore, the untouchable, the silent, the millionaire cloaked in ice, let the tears fall. The storm that had been circling finally broke. Not with lightning or thunder, but with silence. An oppressive, suffocating silence that filled every corner of the Whitmore estate in the days that followed. The empire Damien had inherited was unraveling thread by thread. Contracts dissolved, allies vanished. The newspapers painted him a fool in love, and Naomi a seductress who had toppled a dynasty with a single piece of candy. Naomi bore the weight of it all in quiet resolve. She still came to the estate. Tea, though no one demanded it. She still helped in the kitchens, though she no longer wore her uniform. She could not stop working, not when her hands needed something to do, something that reminded her she had worth beyond the whispers. Damien watched her, torn between awe and grief. The mansion's vastness no longer felt like power, it felt like emptiness. The corridors echoed with absences, the staff thinner, the guests gone. One evening he found Naomi in the conservatory, her fingers brushing the petals of a dying rose. "They're saying I've lost everything," he said, his voice low, almost distant. Naomi looked up at him. "And have you?" He hesitated. The man who once measured life in fortunes and assets, in the precision of deals and the stability of numbers, now faltered. His eyes fell to her hand resting on the stem of the rose. "No," he whispered. "Not everything." Her lips curved into a soft, weary smile. "Then maybe what's left is what matters most." The breaking point came the following week. At a board meeting Damien had no choice but to attend. Naomi waited outside, sitting on a cold marble bench as hours slipped by. She didn't need to hear the words inside to know what was being said. She could feel it. The judgment, the anger, the fear of profit slipping away. When Damien finally emerged, his tie was loosened, his face pale. He walked to her as though every step cost him, and when he sank beside her, the truth spilled out. "They voted me out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Stripped me of control. The company. It's no longer mine." Naomi felt the sting of tears, but she reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. He clung to her fingers like a man clings to driftwood in a storm. "What do I have left?" he asked, his voice cracking. "You have me," she said simply. And in that moment, her words mattered more than every lost fortune. But the world has a way of shifting when truth becomes undeniable. 2 days later, a video surfaced online, taken by one of the hidden reporters at the gala. It showed Damien kneeling, not in scandal, but in sincerity. It captured Naomi's trembling defiance, her words carrying across the ballroom. "I will not leave him, because I saw him long before the rest of you did." The video spread faster than gossip, and for once it wasn't twisted. People saw something raw, something real. They saw not a scandal, but a man stripped of pride and a woman standing unashamed beside him. Messages poured in, letters, calls. Not all were kind, but enough were. Strangers wrote of how Naomi's courage gave them strength. Couples whispered that they envied the love that burned so openly in that ballroom. Even those who had sneered began to falter, their certainty eroded by the undeniable humanity in the recording. For the first time, the story was not just theirs to carry, it belonged to everyone who had ever been overlooked, dismissed, silenced. Naomi and Damien chose to leave the estate, not in shame, but in search of something new. The night before they left, Naomi stood in the empty ballroom one last time. The chandeliers glittered above her, casting light on the same polished floor where Damien had first knelt. She could still hear the echo of glasses, the sting of whispers, the sharp hush before the world shifted. Damien entered quietly, watching her. "Do you regret it?" he asked softly. She turned, her eyes steady. "No. Do you?" His lips curved faintly. "Not for a moment." They stood in silence, then walked out together, hand in hand, leaving the ghosts of wealth and loneliness behind. Their new life was smaller, humbler, but alive. Damien sold the last of what tied him to the empire and invested instead in something Naomi had always dreamed of: a community center in her neighborhood, a place with books, music, laughter, where children could come after school, where no one, he would feel invisible. Naomi poured herself into it, her smile returning in ways Damien had never seen. She greeted every child by name, offered candy at the door the way she once had to him, and filled the halls with warmth. Damien worked beside her, no longer a recluse, but a man learning, slowly, how to live. His silence became something different now, not isolation, but listening. He listened to the children's stories, to the laughter in the halls, to Naomi's soft humming as she closed up each night. And in that listening, he found peace. Months later, as spring unfurled, they stood together outside the center after a long day. The streetlights glowed golden. Children's voices still echoed faintly from down the block. Damien slipped his arm around Naomi's waist. "Do you ever miss it? The estate? The grandeur?" Naomi tilted her head, considering. Then she smiled. "Not when I have this." She gestured at the building, at the life they'd built, at the joy that filled it. "Not when I have you." His throat tightened. He turned to her, his hand brushing her cheek. "You gave me my voice back. And my heart." She leaned into his touch, her eyes shimmering. "And you gave me mine." Their lips met beneath the glow of the streetlight. No cameras, no audience, no scandal. Just love, quiet and certain, blooming where the world least expected it. The millionaire who had once lived in silence found his truth in the maid who dared to offer him candy. And the maid who had once been overlooked found her forever in the man who finally chose to speak. Together, they were no longer whispers in the corner of a ballroom. They were a story, a promise, a beginning. And for once, the world didn't matter.